My name is Carol Swarbrick. Well, that's my professional name. You see, I'm an actress, and I have been all of my career. I've been on Broadway in leads in several shows, and I've done movies with Lily Tomlin, Bette Midler, Dolly Parton, and others. I've done TV series. I've done TV movies. However, you've never heard of me, and that's okay. In fact, I think it makes this story even more important because, as we all know, a few days ago, we lost a former president, Jimmy Carter. And through a lot of serendipitous events, Jimmy Carter became known to me and I to him, as well as my husband, Jim Dries. You see, as I was getting older and growing out of a lot of roles that I played, it was suggested to me that I find a woman about whom I would like to do a one-woman play. And I looked at a lot of women, and my husband, Jim, and I really admired Jimmy Carter, and I remembered Miss Lillian, his mother, from her frequent appearances in talk shows, and I knew she was quite a character, shot from the hip, very, very funny. But when I learned that she celebrated her 70th birthday in India, working in the Peace Corps, I found out that she had character. She was not just a character, she had character, and I wanted to know more about her. So we started writing a play about Lillian Carter for me to perform. We lived in a little town in Washington State, and we did a reading of the play in this little old schoolhouse. And in the audience, after the performance, we had a talk back, and we found out that one of the people in the audience was an all but forgotten granddaughter of Lillian Carter. What are the chances? I mean, that was surprising. And she said after the performance that she never met her grandmother until that night. And she suggested that we videotape a reading of the play and send it to Uncle Jimmy. And I thought, well, there's an idea. And so, do you have an address? I said. And she said, oh, just send it to the Carter Center. So I thought, yeah, well, that's fine. So we videotaped the reading, and I sent it off to the Carter Center, knowing full well that no one would probably watch it. I mean, the furthest thing from any possibility was that former President Jimmy Carter would watch this video. And a couple weeks later, I got a letter in the mail, and I was sure it was a phony because it was signed by Jimmy Carter. It had the seal on the letter. The thing that I was most curious about is there was no stamp on the envelope. Now, here's something that I've learned. If you are tired of paying for postage, run for president, win, and you never have to buy another stamp. Yeah, Jimmy Carter didn't need a stamp on his envelope. It really was from him. And he said a lot of really meaningful things in that letter. He watched the tape. He liked my performance, but even more important than that, number one, he said, before I go on, I want to invite you and your husband, Jim, to come to Plains and meet more of the family. More of the family. It's like through the video somehow I had met him and he had met me already. He also said, this is amazing. He said, we had permission to use anything about his mother in any of the books that he had written. This was incredible. So we planned a trip to Plains. Timing is everything. And we arrived, little did we know, we arrived in Plains after a lot of shuffling through with his secretary, and his secretary saying, no, you're not going to have a meeting with President Carter. He's going to take your picture with him after the church service, but there's no time for that. But President Carter and I had communicated that we were going to have a get-together and talk with each other. So we were staying in Americus, that's about 10 miles away from Plains, because Plains has one hotel with 7 rooms in it, and that is the historic Inn of Plains. There's a gal named Miss Jan, whom we met in person on the day that we drove in. That was October 1st, 2011. Now, Miss Jan, I got to know very well and love her, as does my husband, and we have a mutual fondness. It looked to me like Miss Jan ran the town. And she met me at the inn, as I said I would, and then she was going to give us the lay of the land. And I had brought the letter that he wrote and in which he invited us to come. And she read the letter, and then she said, what are you doing tomorrow? And I said, well, we're going up to Atlanta to the Carter Center. She said, when are you coming back? I don't know. She said, well, as it happens, there's a birthday celebration for President Carter at a church, not but a block away from the hotel where you're staying in Americus, like I said, about 10 miles away from Plains. And it's free. Now, there's no guarantee that President Carter's going to be there, but why don't you go? And so we did. We went to the Carter Center. We came back in plenty of time. We left the hotel, walked over to the church, and there's no Secret Service, no big vans, you know, nobody frisking you on the way into the church. And we thought, well, it's a concert. The price is right. And so we sat down kind of middle back of the church, and a lot of people were there. And then right before the concert was going to begin, in walk Jimmy and Rosalind Carter. And we were so excited. And the concert was wonderful. And after the concert, I just thought, oh, they're going to scoot these people out of there and they won't be there. And then they didn't leave. And President Carter was surrounded by friends. I realized, oh yeah, he lives here. He's lived here since he was a boy. And they were surrounding him, and I thought, oh, if I could just go and talk to him. And Miss Rosalind was at the end of the pew that was empty and talking to one gentleman. And Jim, my husband, said, why don't you go over there and try to talk to her? So I walked around the back and through the empty pew and waited until she had finished with that gentleman. And she turned around, she said, hello. And I said, hello, Mrs. Carter. I play your late mother-in-law in a play. And she said, why, you must be Carol. And I said, yes. She said, oh, I'm so glad to meet you. I'm going to take you to the Pond House tomorrow. Now, the Pond House was where Miss Lillian lived the last several years of her life. The original Pond House had been built by her husband and Jimmy, and it mysteriously burned down one night. And as a surprise, while she was in the Peace Corps in India, Billy and Jimmy built her this Pond House. And we had no thought that we would be able to get inside this house. But anyway, so she said, next thing she said was, she looked over her right shoulder and she says, Jimmy, come over here. I was like, God. So then Jimmy Carter starts walking over. He looks at her, he looks at me. I put out my hand to shake his and say, President Carter, happy birthday. And he said, oh, I know who you are. Now, Rosalind's going to show you the Pond House tomorrow. I cannot, because after church, I'm going to have to be flying off to Europe to raise money for the Carter Center. So that's okay. So that we talked a little bit. It was unreal. Pinch me, I'm dreaming. So that was that evening, and we had it all set up that after church, we would wait until all the pictures had been taken, and we would have a picture taken after church. What they did was, he taught Sunday school, then they took a little break, then was the sermon, and then anybody who had attended the sermon could go out and have their pictures taken with Miss Rosalind and Mr. Jimmy. And we did that. And then I thought, well, then we'll, a couple hours later, maybe we'll go to the Pond House. Well, it was set for sometime like 1:30 or 2 in the afternoon that they were going to pick us up. That would be Miss Rosalind and her Secret Service escorts would pick us up at the Plains Historic Inn. And we're waiting with Miss Jan, and she's not there. And she's not there. And finally, Miss Jan gets a phone call that we won't be going to the pond house. Okay, I was dreaming. But that evening, there was another church service, early evening. There was another church service in a much smaller room with folding chairs. And Jim, my husband, was there. And Miss Rosalind came in and she made a beeline for the chair next to me. And she said, "I'm so sorry. I have a digestive disorder. And poor Amy, she's got it." And who are you telling? I don't even know you. You're being so real. Don't you? No, there's no facade. And she's so apologetic, but she said, "Well, but for sure, tomorrow I will show you the pond house." And we stayed there for the service. And then Miss Jan had organized a lot of the people from the church to get together upstairs in the historic inn where there's an open kitchen and there's a long table, and we were going to have dinner there. And these people all knew Miss Lillian, and they would tell me stories about it, and then we'd be able to put that in the play too. And this one woman, it was perfect. It was, of course, Mr. George, who's married to Miss Jan. Miss Jan was there. My husband, Jim, those were the only two gentlemen at the table. They were all other women. There was Miss Mildred. There was Miss Carol, who played the organ at the church. And anyway, at one point, I think it was Miss Mildred who said, "Well, I hope you don't mind using some salty language, because Miss Lillian certainly did." Well, that just opened up a whole line of vocabulary for the play. And the next day, sure enough, up comes this Secret Service with Miss Rosalind there, and we drive out to the pond house, and she shows us this little simple house built by Jimmy and Billy. A kitchen, a living room, a fireplace. Then there's stairs up to the loft, and she's showing us all that. And she told us a story that after Miss Lillian had died, they found in the back of her closet, she had an entire Dodger baseball uniform, including spikes. She was a huge Dodger fan. And Tommy Lasorda, the late great manager of the Dodgers, had given her that. And along with the uniform, there was a love letter signed by all of the teammates. Okay. So anyway, so we're coming down the stairs, following this former First Lady down the stairs from the loft, and we're thinking, well, the trip is over, the visit is over. And she looks over her shoulder once again, and she says, "Well, now, do you two have time to sit and talk?" Well, I don't know. It was so rich. It was just so she sat down and we sat down, and she once again, she was so personable and real, and that's how we learn to expect from both Carters. Just this, like I said, no facade, no veneer, just real people. And she and I shared something that was an important issue. We both lost our fathers when we were at a very early age, and we talked about how that affects us as adults. But at last, the afternoon was over, and we got back in the Secret Service van and drove back to the inn. But it was an amazing first visit to Plains and meeting the Carters. Well, that was the end of our trip to Plains, but it was clearly not the end of President Carter's interest in our telling his mother's story. In so many ways, it became very evident to us how Jimmy Carter adored, revered his mother. After she passed away, he wrote a book about her, and he called it A Remarkable Mother. We based a lot of the play on that book. He talked occasionally about vying for her attention with Billy, and thinking that Billy usually won that contest. He loved her, and he wanted her story told. That became evident by his constant attention. He would wish us well in notes. We would send a donation to the Plains Better Hometown Project, which he started just to make sure that Plains had good roads, good plumbing, good water, all of that kind of stuff. And he never asked for money for himself. It was always for that project. And he very much wanted people to know his mother more than just the talk shows that she'd been on. So he was so good about getting us information. As I said, he gave us the permission to use anything in his books. Then he gave us permission to go to his presidential library and have access to any pictures that we could see of his mother. It's astonishing, the security that you have to go through to get there, but he gave us entry to that. He always would meet with us if we came to Plains, and we did, of course we did, because every time we'd come to Plains, we'd find another story. After church, we would meet again in a little Sunday school classroom. And one time, I said to both Miss Rosalind and to Mr. Jimmy, I said, was there a phrase that Miss Lillian used? Was there a word she used all the time? Because then we could put that in the script. And they waited. It was a minute or two before Miss Rosalind said, well, she called people honey. She called everybody honey. And Jimmy then chimed in with, she probably called the Pope honey. And so, of course, that went into the script. It was wonderful. They were so free with their stories. We did go to Plains often, and in between our trips, we would get notes from President Carter, either handwritten notes from him, or he would copy our note and put a little handwritten note on the top responding to what we had said. But the Maranatha Baptist Church in Plains had so many highlights for me. The first time we were there, he introduced me. He introduced me as, there's a famous actress who is going to do a play about my mother. And he had me stand up. He pronounced my name correctly. Not only Swarbrick, but my married name Dries, which looks like Dries. He did it all correctly. It was quite something to have a former president say you're a famous actress. Wow, it was really great. And then, as I think I described, he would do his Sunday school class. You do not stand up when he walks in to the church and he's going to teach a Sunday school class. We're given this whole list of guidelines. He's not the president there. He's your Sunday school teacher. It's so respectful of his faith. Anyway, after the Sunday school class, he and Miss Rosalind go back to a Sunday school classroom or whatever, and then after 10 minutes or so, they come back into the church and file into the pews. Well, on this particular Sunday, and of course, when he's teaching Sunday school, the church is packed, and you have to stay for the sermon in order to get your picture taken. So the church is still packed. Well, Jim, my husband, and I are sitting right on the aisle of the right-hand aisle, and nobody's behind us. So they come in and start coming down the aisle, and Miss Rosalind sees me, and she stops and she touches my arm because it's resting on the arm of the pew, and she starts talking to me. And of course, then Mr. Jimmy stops and starts talking to us. We both stand up and we're chatting, and we can see the heads of the people go, "Who are they?" You know. And President Jimmy Carter looks over my shoulder to the people who are craning their necks trying to see, who the heck are these people? And he says, "She's my second mother." Oh my gosh. So this is how many times am I going to buckle my knees in the church? And I quickly recovered and said, "And I'm very proud of you." And he responded, "Well, that's what it's all about." And then they took their seats and we took our seats. Incredible. Incredible. We knew them. It was really something. Also, every year they had a big auction in Plains for the Plains Better Hometown Project, which is now called Friends of Jimmy Carter. Well, so they would announce, what was going to be at the silent auction, what was going to be in the live auction. And the live auction, these are the big money pieces, and they would like have dinner for 4 with Mr. Jimmy and Miss Rosalind or things like that. One of their items was a fishing trip. 10 people to join Miss Rosalind and Mr. Jimmy fishing in the pond next to the pond house, and then the people would go in and have lunch prepared by Billy's widow and her family. And so we got some friends in the little town where we were living in Washington State, and some very supportive friends, and we figured out, what's the most we could bid on this. And the most we could bid was $10,000. So that evening, after the silent auction is going on, then all those who want to be a part of the live auction, we go into this. It's a pretty large hall, and we're sitting there, and the bids are going up and they're going on. Little do we know that Miss Jan said she was my friend. She's on the phone with somebody who's watching this by remote and is bidding on items, and this guy or gal on the phone wants to bid on the fishing trip. Uh-oh. So we're bidding, and we're looking over at Miss Jan. It's just fine if she just goes, oh, no, but she's not doing that. So we bid, I don't know, 5,000, and then they go 6,000. 7,000, blah, blah, blah. They bid 10,000. Game over, Except we thought, now, we know Mr. Jimmy and Miss Rosalind now, and they know us. So maybe they could figure out another day when they could do another fishing trip, and they could do another lunch. And so we go to the auctioneer, and we go to Miss Jan, who has betrayed us so horribly by being on the phone. But we say, how about another one? We'll give you $10,000 for that. And Mr. Jimmy being the guy, he wants to raise money for the town, right? He wants his mother's story to be told. He wants to raise money for the town. Yes. So we booked it. We had 10 people, and we're out there fishing, and then we go in for lunch, and there's like a head table, and it's in a T, and Miss Rosalind sitting here, Mr. Jimmy sitting here, and he said, I want Carol to sit right here. Oh, I was nervous. I thought, what am I going to say to him? What? But unbelievable. It was wonderful. We talked. He said grace before we ate, and then any questions? He just said, any questions? Anybody? He was so accessible. It was wonderful. Well, in between performances of the Miss Lillian play and trips to Plains, of course, we had a regular life to take care of. Well, some of us had exceptional lives. Our producer was visiting friends in Paris, and one of the friends that he got together with in Paris, thank you very much, was a very talented, gifted, and respected documentarian, and that is Vivian Winther. And she said, well, what are you up to right about now? And he said that he was working on the Miss Lillian project, and he described it to her, and she saw a video of a more recent production of our play, and she said, wow, this would make a really interesting film, but if and only if we can get an interview with President Carter. Well, we thought, it's not impossible. We know him, and he really wants this story told, and And wouldn't that be enticing to have the story told in a format that can be seen by so many more people than a one-woman play? There we are, March 19th, 2019. My phone rings. It's Jimmy Carter's secretary. And she said, yes, the president and first lady will be interviewed for your film. They will both give you 45 minutes each. And there were certain just requirements for us. We had to send them the questions that would be asked during the interview. Again, timing was amazing. We heard prior to it was amazing. First of all, it was amazing because I'm thinking it's March 19th. These are elderly people. I don't know, when would we like to interview them? And I said, how's April? And so we got lined up for like April 16th. And that was going in their calendars with the secretary, and we're all lined up. I didn't even think of how you put together a film crew in that much time. But on the 14th, a crew from LA with Vivian Winther, the director, flew to Atlanta, drove to Plains. They got there. We taped on Monday. This is another thing, because President Carter really wanted this story told, we were given permission to shoot in the boyhood home. I was lying on the bed that Earl shared with Miss Lillian. I was in the kitchen where it was just wonderful. The next day was the interview in what is now the Carter's office, in Plains. It was at one time Miss Lillian's home. Well, prior to our going to Plains for this interview, Miss Rosalind was ill. She was so ill she couldn't even go to church. And we're thinking, oh no, what are we going to do? Because this is heavily on Mr. Jimmy's mind, too. 77 years of marriage, that's going to weigh on you. At the time, it was probably 74. At any rate, so we get to Plains. We go to the historic inn. The woman who is then taking charge of the inn says, it was so wonderful to see Miss Rosalind at church today. And we went, This is also right before Mr. Jimmy took the fall that led to a decline in his health. So the timing was perfect. We didn't even realize that Secret Service van drives up. Miss Rosalind gets out of the car looking like $1,000,000. And I was wearing a t-shirt that was a replica of what Miss Lillian wore the day after the election in 1976, which just says, Jimmy won. And President Carter met me at the door, and I said, remember this t-shirt? He said, oh, you deserve a hug for that. Well, he hugged and kissed me, I'll just tell you. And now I would like to introduce my husband, my partner, this very wise and handsome man, Jim Dries. We've been partners through this entire adventure, and he's going to tell you a little bit about why we're making this video. Jim.
Well, President Carter recently passed away, and we wanted to do something to be able to pay our respects. We were unable to travel to Atlanta or DC to be there in person paying our respects. And we realized we have many wonderful stories, great remembrances of President and Mrs. Carter. So we would share those with the world so that their memory and the part of their lives that we played would be shared with the world. In my life, I've met many people that were considered great, that were considered personalities for the world, people like John F. Kennedy, Richard Nixon, the Dalai Lama, Muhammad Ali, and so forth, but none of them I ever felt could be approached the way President and Mrs. Carter were approached. It helped indeed that we were going to be telling the story of Lillian Carter, President Carter's mother, that both President and Mrs. Carter admired and loved, a person very close to them. we were given access that we couldn't believe we were able to be given access to. They opened their hearts, they opened their homes, they opened their memories to us and shared honestly and truly, and we wanted to honor them in this way. And we are so grateful that we were able to have our lives meet. It seemed like it was meant to be, and all the little things that happened to make us connected and get this film done were just a real tribute to their greatness, their kindness, and their generosity. And we hope those of you watching this get a sense of what we were able to experience in person. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you.